I'm Tracey Ross. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Center for American Progress, and I'm joined by Linda Tirado, whose recent book, Hand to Mouth, Living in Bootstrap America, just was released last week, right?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I know that you've been on a whirlwind tour discussing this book, but the book is really kind of a long time in the making. And I think the reason why we're here is because of an essay you wrote last year. It was entitled, Why I Make Terrible Decisions or Poverty Thoughts. Can you tell us a bit about that essay? And it was actually a response to a blog comment.
Yeah, it wasn't even an essay.
It wasn't an essay.
I actually am from the internet, and I was having a conversation with my friends after work one night, and somebody brought up, the iPhone with food stamps. And what she said was, I know I'm not supposed to judge people for that. Somebody remind me why, because I'm feeling a little judgy. And I went, oh, I know this one. And I kind of fired off a response and hit publish and didn't really think of it. And then I started to get a really good response. And then I started to get a kind of weird response. And then I got kind of an incredible response. And then I was on the front page of the Huffington Post and in Forbes. And Russia called and Israel called, and I have a fan base in Serbia, which is interesting to me. And then there was, do you want to write a book? And so I did that, and now I am interviewed about that book.
Right. Yeah.
So, the sequence of events.
Today.
Yeah, and here we are.
So tell us a bit about that book. About the essay. Why did you decide to give such a thorough response to a relatively flippant comment that you've probably heard? You've heard similar comments before.
Yeah, I was in a mood. That literally was it. I was off a rough shift at work, and somebody asked a question, and I thought, I know the answer to this one. And I'm incredibly wordy. And so I often wrote responses of that length, maybe not quite that length, but, I was fairly well known for long comments, and there was one. But that one in particular, that for whatever reason, and I don't remember the original wording of the thing I was responding to, but something about the wording made me think I can explain this. And so I did. And as much as I was capable of at 2:00 in the morning, after a long shift. And that really was it. It was just kind of a gut level, like, yeah, I know this one.
Yeah.
And so off it went. I really didn't give it nearly as much thought as people give me credit for.
So the essay, like the book, kind of gives us a tour of the things that poor people are judged for. Everything from diet to work ethic to sex lives. And you got a lot of, criticism in response. A lot of people thought that, well, how's this woman actually a low-income person? She's so articulate.
Yeah, you can't be poor, you know words.
Right, exactly. And people started digging into your background. How did that come about? Because even the New York Times, they questioned your credibility.
Yeah, which is really interesting because in order to question the credibility of somebody who says this is what poor feels like, you have to say, you don't look poor. And to be able to say that, you have to have an idea of what poor looks like, which is really interesting to me because working class folks, people near the minimum wage, that's like 1/3 of America, and we don't look like anything. We look like everything and everybody because we're all over the place. And so the criticism, I think, was more projection than it was anything because people wanted to be able to say, poor looks like this other thing.
Right.
Poor looks like that over there. Poor isn't skilled because we have a meritocracy, and if you're skilled, you're going to be successful. There's no way you slide through cracks. Cracks don't exist in America. And that was really the genesis of most of the criticism and the backlash was people saying you're doing poor improperly.
Right.
I mean, my parents were middle class, and I was estranged from my parents for most of my adult life. So, I didn't have those family resources. Hypothetically, I did, and eventually we came to, we reconciled when my first daughter was born. But in the intervening years, no, I didn't have the family resources and I didn't have a degree and I was working in the service economy just like anybody else. Now, does the fact that my childhood was more comfortable than many children mean that I did not experience that in the service industry, mean that I don't understand what it's like to not be able to pay your bills? How many years do you have to not be able to pay your bills before you can say, this has been my broad experience and I am allowed to stand up and say that? And so people ask me about the criticism a lot, and I say I don't really think it's criticism. I think it's defense mechanism. of being able to say like, well, you clearly just, you know, and I titled the thing Why I Make Terrible Decisions because I'm snarky by nature. And a lot of people grabbed onto that and said, oh, well, you made all the bad decisions and that's why you slid to the bottom. And I like to say it's kind of a mix of decision and luck. Because if I had been in a position where I could cover for my mistakes, like a lot of wealthy people can, I never would have slid to the bottom. Or if I'd had spectacularly good luck, I could have made all the bad decisions I wanted and it wouldn't have mattered. But if you don't have those things, if you don't have the cushion and you're not, you know, equipped to make great decisions, because I mean, I left home when I was 16 years old. How wonderful are the decisions of any 17-year-old out on their own gonna be?
Sure.
So I always laugh when people are like, well, you just didn't do it properly. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll tell you what. Find yourself, think about yourself at 16. Now assume that you can do anything you want. You have no rules and no, you know, like, how well do you think you would have done? Probably about as well as I did. So, you know, the criticism is always really interesting to me because it tells you more about the person doing the criticizing than it ever does about you. I mean, because here's what it comes down to. I gave my welfare records to the Nation. I gave them to the Washington Post. I gave an interview. I took my damn teeth out on YouTube. I do not have anything more to prove because all I ever said was it sucks to work hard every day and never get anywhere. And that's a true statement whether or not I was a multimillionaire living in a condo or whether I've never had a home in my entire life. It sucks to work hard and never get anywhere.
Definitely.
It's a true thing no matter what you do.
Yeah, I think also part of the problem is that when people hear the poverty rate, which has been steady about 15% over the last several years, last year it was 14.5%, we tend to think that it's the same 15% of Americans when really people are cycling in and out. Only a small percentage of people are poor for, you know, those few years that we're measuring.
They assume that most people who are working class will be in poverty, like technically 5 to 6 times over the course of their life. Most people will get out in under 4 years because it really depends. Do you have good health this year? Did you luck into a good job? Maybe your spouse got something awesome. Maybe you got like a crazy tax rebate or, you know, an uncle died and left you 20 grand. You know, you can have good years and you can have bad years and they come and they go. And that's what being working class in America is.
And actually, I want to read a part of your book that I think really captures what it's about and what you've been saying. She writes, "What I can say for sure is that downward mobility is like quicksand. Once it grabs you, it keeps constraining your options until it's got you completely. I slid to the bottom through a mix of my own decisions and some seriously bad luck. I think that's true of most people. While it can seem like upward mobility is blocked by a lead ceiling, the layer between lower middle class and poor is horrifyingly porous from above." What does that conjure up for you? Because throughout the book, it sounds like there's a level of anxiety that you can feel about being in poverty, a level of fatigue, and just kind of a constant fear that you're going to dip below.
I'm so glad that came through.
Yeah. And so in reading and hearing your own words back to you, you know, what were you thinking when you wrote that? Because it seems to really capture all of that.
I was thinking about the flood when I wrote that. When I was pregnant with my first child, we discovered we were pregnant, and my husband decided to go back to school on his GI Bill. He had been recently home from Iraq. And so we applied, we got him into school, and we planned to move to Cincinnati, and we were going to be living on his stipend because with the GI Bill, you get your books paid, you get your tuition paid, and then they give you a living stipend, which is dependent on the zip code of the school that you're in. And for us, we were supposed to be getting, I think, somewhere between $1,200 or $1,400 a month or something. It was enough to barely live on. You know, we could make it through the semester. My daughter was due 3 weeks after that first semester. And then the money never came. There was a paperwork screw up somewhere. The school didn't put through some paperwork somewhere. And so every week we'd go and we'd say, did the stipend come? And they'd say, no, not this week. Come back next week. And eventually we both got jobs at a Burger King locally, and we got the crappiest apartment we could find because we thought it was just going to be temporary, because now we were going to get a huge check for the back pay, right? And we'd be able to put down a deposit on a decent apartment where we could live with our kid. And the money just kept not showing up all semester long. It kept not showing up, and we were living in this awfully maintained apartment. And then there was a spring flood. There was a summer storm in Ohio. Those things